On today's show, the Atlanta Hawks had their biggest game of the season on Wednesday in New York as part of the NBA Cup, the quarterfinal against the New York Knicks. And before that game happens, a crossover edition of the podcast is upon us. Myself and Gavin Schall of Locked On Knicks talking all things Hawks and Knicks, and it's all coming up right now.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1863 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Rowland, coming to you on a Monday evening into Tuesday. And today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook. Begin the season right now with a big return at FanDuel. If you're a new customer, place a $5 bet. You can start with $150 in bonus bets when you win that first $5 bet. The place to go is FanDuel.com to get started. I also want to encourage you at the top of the podcast, as I always do, to make it your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Check us out and subscribe to the podcast anywhere you might find your podcasts. That includes Apple and Spotify on the audio side. We are also on YouTube on the video side. Please like this video as you're watching it, and please subscribe on audio and video to support the podcast in the best possible way. And today's show is actually a crossover edition of the podcast. Myself and Gavin Schall of Locked On Knicks in advance of the game on Wednesday in New York. If you've been under a rock recently, the Hawks play in the NBA Cup quarterfinal on Wednesday. It's a road game in New York, so they're underdogs in that game. We'll get into that a little bit more, actually, individually on Tuesday night into Wednesday. But in between the kind of I was a disappointing loss on Sunday, which I broke down in full on this podcast, and in between that and the next podcast I'm doing, it was good to get with Gavin and get the Knicks side of things in this game. Obviously, it is a crossover, so there's a little bit of Hawks, a little bit of Knicks, back and forth keys to the game, but certainly informative, and hopefully you enjoy this conversation. Please, again, subscribe. Stay tuned for more coming up later on this week, again, before the game, and then again after the game, and much more, because if the Hawks win Wednesday, they play in Las Vegas on Saturday. So without any more delay, we'll dive in right now with myself and Gavin Schall talking all things Hawks and Knicks.
All right, guys, as promised, lucky enough to be joined by the fantastic solo host of the Locked On Hawks podcast, Rowland. Brad, always fun to get to talk to you. We got to dive deep on that playoff series that Knicks fans remember fondly a couple years back. I had you on last summer, so our opportunities are kind of few and far between. But because our two teams are playing the NBA Cup, we both thought this would be a great opportunity to get together. So I want to start off kind of big picture because it's been a little bit of a weird Knicks season. It seems just from the outside looking in, it's been a little bit of a weird Hawks season, maybe with things trending upwards, but 25 games in, you guys are on a 6-game winning streak, including wins over the Cavs twice. You beat the Bucks, you beat the Lakers earlier in the year, you beat the Knicks, you beat the Celtics, coming off a 30-point loss to the Nuggets. Maybe the best way to say this is what's the vibe right now? How are you feeling about this team 25 games in?
I'm feeling okay. You know, the Hawks are in a different spot than the Knicks, of course. They weren't coming in with 50-win expectations and all those things, but it's kind of a retooling year. Not a rebuilding year, but it's kind of a retooling year for the Hawks, and that is they're in this unique spot where they're not tanking. Like they have no incentive to do that, so they were always trying to win this year, but at the same time trying to win with a team that's still young and trying to figure itself out. So that maybe leads to some uncertainty and some up and down nature. You mentioned it already, but they started 4-7 and 7-11, and now they're 6-1 in the last 7, and the one loss is a 30-point loss. I think they're decent. They're pretty good. They're plucky. This is their best defensive team that they've had in probably 4 years. Offensively, it's less exciting than it's been at times in the recent past. And the result Sunday against Denver was kind of a fluke in some respects. Like, Denver is really good, of course. They ran into the Jokic buzzsaw. He was the best player in the world in that particular game. That happens sometimes. And the Hawks just didn't make a shot in the first half, and it happens sometimes in the NBA. But before that, they were playing really, really well. And what I've been saying to Hawks fans is very simple, is like, all right, they're not as good as they were during this winning streak, and they're not as bad as they were before it started. That's kind of where I am. I think their overall record right now, as we're talking, they're 13-12. That seems about right to me. This is like a 500-ish team, I think, on paper, which is actually beating their projections from the preseason. So that's actually a step forward. But and yeah, they had good wins and bad losses. They're the only. Actually, that's not true anymore. Until recently, they were the only team to lose to the Wizards this season. And then the Nuggets lost to the Wizards. Finally, they let the Hawks off the hook. So that tells you how low the floor is. Yeah. And a road win against Boston is how high the ceiling is. So this is a team that is not predictable night to night, but certainly a pretty decent team.
And handing the Cavs, I think, half their losses on the season. Like that's pretty crazy. And maybe should scare the Knicks as a team that's already beaten the Knicks and clearly capable of beating anyone on any given night. I guess where I wanted to start as we begin to like zoom in a little bit. This is a super deep team. I really liked their offseason, and I feel like kind of justified in that and how they started. Like the premise of just surrounding Trae Young with as much size, athleticism, defensive versatility as possible. Like that is how I would build around him personally. So love what Knicks legend Landry Fields is doing with you guys. But I'm super curious because just another, I feel like there's, maybe this is just talent influx across the league, but it feels like more teams are ultra deep than ever before. That was the Knicks before they made all these trades and consolidated. It kind of feels like that's Atlanta right now as they've gotten healthy. And I'm wondering, now that Bogdanovich is back, now that DeAndre Hunter is back, what does the rotation look like for you guys? And I guess, do you like how they're playing guys, how much they're playing guys? I know Okongwu Capella has obviously been a discussion for years and years and years now. What do you make of the Hawks' depth, and how are they actually deploying all the talent they have?
Yeah, like you said, they are deep. Sometimes it's easy to forget that teams get hurt during the course of the season, and even the deeper teams, you get 2 or 3 injuries at the wrong time, and it feels like you're shallow all of a sudden. So nobody's.
I know we were down 5 of our top 6 guys in the playoffs, so I get
it.
Yeah.
So nobody's deep enough to withstand that, but the Hawks do have, especially when they're all healthy, like you just said, pretty good depth. And that's a point of emphasis, I think, for this season coming in. They knew how shallow they were a year ago when they had a couple of injuries that the bottom fell out on them, and they're trying to avoid that this year. They're, honestly, the way they built this bench has been a big talking point locally. They have a couple of guys in Bogdanovich and Hunter who have been starters in their career and who are starting level players who are coming off the bench as a choice, really, not because they're not better players than the guys behind them. It's just that's the role they've been slotted into, and it's kind of worked. As far as rotation is concerned, of course, we're recording this before the injury reports are out. The Hawks had a couple guys out on Sunday. Jalen Johnson didn't play Sunday. It's right shoulder soreness. I think he's probably going to play, if I had to guess right now, on Wednesday. Bogdanovich also sat that game out, but he spoke to the media today, seemed to be fine. So if everybody's available, they're kind of going with a 9-man rotation. They've pretty much locked in 8. Their starting lineup this year, for the most part, has been Trae Young, Dyson Daniels, the number 1 overall pick, Zachary Richaud, Jalen Johnson, and Clint Capella. And then their top 3 bench guys, Bogdanovich, Hunter, and Okongwu, who we've all talked about already. The 9th spot is the backup point guard spot. It's been Kobe Buffkin at times, their second-year guard. It's been Vit Krejci at times in kind of a hybrid role. I don't have a prediction. Maybe I would lean towards Krejci for this game because he's played more recently than Buffkin. But that's the one spot that's kind of been up for grabs, and the other 8 are kind of locked in if everybody's healthy.
And has that – I'm trying to think of the right way to phrase this because you guys have just gotten healthy. So, but have you seen that depth overwhelm teams? Because I look at that and I see Bogdanovich and Hunter coming off the bench, and it's similar to what the Knicks had for years, or at least a year and a half with Emmanuel Quickly, Isaiah Hartenstein, and Josh Hart, where it's all right, you're throwing these guys in just way too good for most opposing bench units.
Yeah, a big part of that winning streak they just had was the bench. Honestly, there was this game against the Lakers that they won in overtime where they set a franchise record, at least a 50-year record for bench scoring margin. They outscored them by 50 points off the bench in that game, just an outrageous number. And that's not projectable moving forward. But yeah, there's been many times, and it's kind of been weird for me as someone. It's not been the case in recent years, but when their bench comes in, they've been winning those minutes consistently for the last few weeks anyway. And that makes sense. When you line up those 3 guys off the bench, like Bogdanovich, Hunter, and Okongwu against a lot of benches around the league, those guys are better than most opposing benches. And not every team approaches their benches the same. Some teams really stagger heavily. Sometimes some teams like the Nuggets, who the Hawks just saw, play their starters heavily together and their bench gets killed. And it's one of those things where it's kind of, especially in a 1-game scenario like this one, you might see more minutes for guys. Of course, the Knicks play their guys a lot all the time, as I'm sure we can discuss. But yeah, I think that overall, when they are healthy, the Hawks do have an advantage there, and I think they know that, and they kind of lean on it for the most part.
Yeah, it makes sense. The word I was looking for, I think, was overqualified, which is, I think, what the Knicks had in the past, certainly what Atlanta has now. You said it's the best Hawks defense, the best the Hawks defense has been in years. I'm almost curious. I think last I looked, 19th in defensive rating right now. Why aren't they even better on that end of the floor? Because I'm outside looking in, 2 guys who maybe you could tell me maybe Capella's fallen off a little bit, but I look at 2 really solid defensive center, loads of versatile athletic wings. Dyson Daniels just putting together an outrageous, historic, eyes bug out of your head, comic book style type of season with the number of deflections he's gotten. Is it just the fact that you were a little bit beaten up? Is it that just NBA offenses are so good now that even relatively Atlanta struggled? Is it that Richaud, for all of his talent on that end, is younger? Is it Trae Young, who I know the perception is that he's, I believe, playing some of the better defense of his career, still obviously a target? What have kind of been the weak points for Atlanta so far this year?
Yeah, most of it was early in the year, and this still persists. Where I believe, as of right now, they're still dead last in the league of 3-point defense.
Hmm.
It's hard to be good when you're that bad at that particular aspect, and
Yeah.
there's a little bit of luck involved with that, of course. But they're still allowing too many attempts, which is kind of death in the NBA right now. When you allow that many attempts, your teams are going to make them on you sometimes, and you're going to lose. But yeah, personnel-wise, when they're healthy, they're pretty strong across the board. Trey is really their only flashing weakness, and like you just said, and I've said this a lot too, he's gotten better. He's more competitive defensively than he's ever been. Ricochet is actually impressed for a rookie. He's still a rookie, but he's been pretty good defensively. It was the time when they did not have guys healthy, when they were without DeAndre Hunter. Like you're playing the likes of like David Roddy. All respect to David Roddy. They got killed in his minutes defensively. The numbers are really bad in those. So like when they've been whole, they've been like a league average or better defense so far this year. It's been when they're not whole and a little bit of shooting luck. So Dyson is definitely the linchpin of that. Their center play is pretty good. Capella is not what he was 4 years ago, but still for me, an above average defensive center. They don't have a ton of weaknesses. It's just if you get a guy or two down, their deeper bench guys are not great defenders. Garrison Matthews, David Roddy, Larry Nance currently is not the greatest defender in the world. So you get into that and you're in trouble. But in this kind of setting, when you're playing probably 8 or 9 guys, not too much to pick on for this Hawks team. And I think they actually are better than the numbers right now.
How have you felt? I was going to say this for the last question, but I'm just so fascinated. I think they closed the game recently with like Trae Young and 4 wings around him, like Jalen Johnson, DeAndre Hunter, Ricochet, Dyson Daniels, which is obviously just feels like kind of like an ultra modern, like wet dream of like an NBA nerds lineup. Like tell me a little bit about that group and how they performed and like how much run they've gotten so far, because I know Hunter got healthy relatively recently.
Yeah, they haven't done it a lot. I think it was mostly out of desperation in that moment that they did that. Yeah. But still, it's like an option you can go to. Jalen Johnson is a really good rebounder, for instance. It really helps you be able to do that kind of stuff. He's got good length. Hunter's got good size. They're still probably too small against most teams to do that, but they do have real wing depth. And because Dyson's such a maniac defensively in the best possible way, you can kind of get away with a lot of stuff. Like they don't have, Trey is the weak point there, but if you wanted to go a little bit even crazier, like you just alluded to, maybe you throw out a Buffkin lineup like that, or Krejci, and suddenly you got your whole team is 6'7" or taller. They have some weirdness they can get to if they want to do that. They still play offensively a little bit more like a conventional team a lot of the time with Trey handling the ball. But if they wanted to get weird, they could. And a lot of that's wing depth, and that's one of the building blocks of this new era. You mentioned Landry Fields and Kyle Korver taking over now. They have really tried to, for the first time since the Hawks drafted Hunter and Cam Reddish long ago, insulate Trae Young with a bunch of athletic wings. It's not like a revolutionary idea, but if you can do it and it works out defensively and you have enough shooting, like that's kind of what you need to do in the NBA, is just get a bunch of big physical wings who can defend and shoot, and that's kind of the theory.
All right, so let's flip it and we can wrap our Hawks talk on this. Tell me a little bit about the offense. Obviously, in years past, like when Trey's been on the floor, they've essentially scored at will. I've heard you talk on the pod about the ball movement being a little bit better, maybe the offensive ecosystem, post DeJounte Murray just being a little bit healthier, like a very clear-cut pecking order. Obviously, Jalen Johnson, I think a no-doubter of an all-star season so far. Why haven't they been even better on that end of the floor? Do you think that's something that's coming now, to your point, like they've just all this firepower off the bench on top of Trey to kind of buoy whatever weak points they have with the starting unit?
Yeah, I think they're still very clearly their best when Trey plays. No surprise there. And they're quite bad when he doesn't play. No surprise there on offense as well. They have about 101 offensive rating with Trey off the floor. Like it's just like league worst kind of lineup. So that's been a theme for a long time. But the high has not been as high with Trey. Part of that is that Trey's having kind of a rough shooting season. In fact, the worst shooting season of his career so far, at least maybe since he was a rookie. That's part of it. Also, they don't have a lot of shooting overall. They have some good shooters. Bogdanovich, of course, is a great shooter. Hunter's a good shooter. But there are too many lineups that they kind of have to go to with only 1+ shooter on the court. Like not a ton of total non-shooters, but Dyson Daniels, below average shooter. Ricochet right now, rookie, not a great shooter at this point in time. Jalen Johnson's a decent shooter, but not a great one. Capella's like they have a bunch of like okay to non-shooters that they have to play. And even when you have Trae Young, he mostly just lifts the floor there. Like it's hard to get a ceiling outcome offensively when you only have 1 or 2 great shooters. That's for me, that's the biggest problem with their offense right now. But they're still okay with Trae. It's just when he sits, it gets a little bit dire.
That makes a lot of sense. All right. Next on Locked On Knicks and Locked On Hawks, we're going to switch roles. You're going to ask me a lot about the Knicks. Then we're going to do some keys to that quarterfinal. We'll talk about that next on Locked On Hawks and Locked On Knicks. But first, we want to tell you about our good friends over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Brad, you can probably empathize with me on this, with the Falcons struggling a little bit of late. I have loved just going mid-game, seeing what the line is for the Giants, and just throwing some money down against them. That's how I buoy my podcasting income. If you want to join me, visit FanDuel.com today to join. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets. Again, if you win your first $5 bet, that is FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, buddy, I'm going to pass the mic to you. What do you want to know about the New York Knicks?
All right, here we go. Okay, we've gone. It's been a while since this game happened, but the Hawks beat the Knicks in Atlanta on a night when the Hawks were not even at their best. We just talked about the depth and the Hawks not playing that well when they were banged up. They were banged up in that game, and they still won. What would you say is the biggest change since then? Because the Knicks started out a little bit slow, I would say overall. I think they were 3-4 after that game. They were 4-5 early in the season, maybe 6-6, something like that. They've gotten hotter since then. Is it just as clear as the offense going crazy, or is there something that I'm missing from the outside looking in?
So I think it's a couple different things. I think the Knicks defense is still not in the place they want it to be, but I think it's substantially better than it was on that day. I went back and looked through my notes, and so, like, when I'm watching a game, I will just make a bullet point for defense and just write down like every single defensive breakdown I see watching live. And there have been some long lists. I'm going back through it. I think the Hawks, the word count is like over 300, I think, just for like bad things that were happening the same day. Like just reading through it, like Mikal and OG Anunoby, who were supposed to be the basis of the Knicks, having an above average defense just over and over again, not on the same page in that one, like making the wrong switches, like a bunch of times, if I'm remembering correctly, it was like two of them sticking on one guy, and like Shai, who cooked that game. I think best offensive game of his career so far. Just being left wide open in the corner. And like even late in the game, like OG Anunoby making really like bad mistakes, like showing too hard on Dyson Daniels and like giving up a 3 to Jalen Johnson. And it just felt like it was like a game where the Knicks shot the ball really well. Like to your point on the Hawks, like poor 3-point defense, the Knicks got off 28 threes in the first half of that game. Like if the Knicks are shooting that many threes and their quality looks, they should be beating 90% of the teams in the league, especially a beat up Hawk squad. And they couldn't because like their defense was just not on the same page. And they certainly haven't figured all that out. Like they are fresh off getting torched by the Detroit Pistons. So a repeat performance there is totally possible. But the single biggest thing is Mikal Bridges and Karl Anthony Towns elevating on that end of the floor. Bridges, as much as his offense was weird, like the disappointment in how he's played defense so far was probably the single biggest thing. A guy who's supposed to be an elite screen navigator, an elite rear side contest guy, just was kind of dying on screens, was playing very upright, like just looked like he got like tranquilized, like Will Ferrell in old school, like at the start of every possession. And then Towns just wasn't really affecting anyone at the rim. I think opponents started the season like 26-30 against him at the basket. And he hasn't been great there, but the efforts improved. Tibbs has mixed in some cat playing at the level, which he's just clearly more comfortable in than drop. And he's just been a little more impactful as a rim protector. So assuming he's out there, we're going to see he's dealing with a little bit of a knee injury right now. Those are kind of the two things that have changed. And then OG Anunoby's just been out of this world. 3 of his last 4 games, he's had at least 7 combined blocks and steals, which is just a crazy number. So he's hitting Dyson Daniels territory. So the Knicks might have their own guy on that end of the floor who could equal Daniels' effort.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about Mikal Bridges because, not an every game Knicks watcher, but the discourse on Mikal nationally has not been the kindest this season. I was wondering how much of that you share and what you've seen, because I will just say what I observed. Like, I didn't love his defense at Brooklyn, and I think that's maybe crossed over from what I've seen so far. But again, I'm not the expert here. You are. So where do things actually stand? What should people expect from Mikal Bridges in this one game sample size?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think a lot of people, like every Nets person I had on, even more so as just a New Yorker, a lot of my friends are Nets fans and talking to them, and they'd be like, yeah, he's trash on defense. I don't know why he had that perception of being a depoy candidate. And we were all sort of like, all right, but if he doesn't have to carry that load and it's games that matter, like why at 28 would he be a completely different defensive player than he was at 25, right? It doesn't really make sense, especially for a guy who's like not a head case, like known to be about all the right stuff. And yet like his defense was mystifyingly bad. And it it felt like lack of effort at times, but he was just like in a weird headspace to start the season. And I don't know if it was something in his personal life. Like I've gotten a little talk radio-y on this pod, like trying to decipher what's going on with him. But the last 3 or 4 games, as he started shooting the ball better, he started attacking the basket like a little more. I think my friend Ariel Pacheco, who's come on the pod a couple of times, said it best. Like there was just a distinct lack of physicality in his game. Through 20 games of the season, he'd only taken 13 free throws. Like I think that sums it up more than anything else. And for whatever reason, the last 4 games or so, that's flipped. He kind of looks like how you'd expect him to look on both ends, much better at the point of attack. So I'd be confident you're getting something closer to peak Mikal Bridges, even if he's not all the way back there on both ends of the floor, because the offense, we can talk about that more if you want, was also very, very weird to start the year.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of related to that. Listeners of my podcast will laugh that I'm asking this. I'm a big fan of highlighting the possession battle overall, like, because it just matters. Like, you want to take more shots than your opponent, right? And I'm used to the Knicks being dominant in that area, honestly, the last couple of years. I know this is a very different team, different personnel, but they're not anymore. Like, at least this year they haven't been. They've been kind of about even, I would say, overall position battle-wise. Like, that's fine when you make a lot of shots and they're making a lot of shots, but how much of that is just the personnel? How much of that is sustainable? And because the Hawks have actually been pretty good in that area this year is part of the reason why I'm asking. Like, that might be for the key section as well, but like, is this the new Knicks as far as like just clearly relying on their shooting more than they have in the past? This makes sense, but is that like normal baseline for them now?
Yeah. It's weird in the sense that like the Knicks in the past could win a lot of games where they shot the ball terribly because they were just a dominant Mitchell Robinson right there with Steven Adams, the best offensive rebounder on planet Earth. Isaiah Hartenstein was not far behind him. Josh Hart, I think, emboldened even more to just be a total lunatic coming off the bench, was amazing in that capacity, like the best 6'5" and under rebounder in basketball. And then you had Julius Randle, who, like, especially in the offensive end, could be really fearsome as an offensive rebounder. Dante DiVincenzo flying into crash. And it was just sort of the mentality of like, we don't have the most talent in the world. We don't have the most shot making in the world beyond Jalen Brunson and Julius when he was feeling it. So we have to crash. We have to win that way. They had the 3rd best offense in basketball 2 years ago, despite not being a very good shooting team, because they had no turnovers and they were great rebounding the ball. That's shifted quite a bit. Like Karl-Anthony Towns has been excellent as a defensive rebounder. He's been very good as an offensive rebounder. Josh Hart is still solid in that, but I think just because he has more responsibilities in different areas, it's been a little bit less of a focus. And then the other thing is they've become like the best or one of the best shooting teams in all of basketball, the best offense in all of basketball. And I think you lose some of that scrappiness inherently. Like there's less of a desperation there when you're that good of a shooting team. I think the other part of the possession battle that I continue to watch is, as of about 2 weeks ago, this is a good reminder for me to check, they were only 28th in the league in forced turnovers, which is kind of crazy when you have Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby, who, like, Bridges since his first 2 years in the league has not necessarily been great in that, but I sort of thought there'd be an uptick this year playing with OG, playing with Josh Hart, and just a collective like length, physicality, and activity of those guys. I thought that turnover rate would pick up. And instead, the Knicks dropped from 13th last year in forced turnovers to 28th. And I think playing Towns at the level has ramped up the activity. The last few games have felt a little bit better on that front, but it's something to watch. The Knicks still do a very good job protecting the basketball. I think Campaign was first in the NBA in assist to turnover ratio. Jalen Brunson not far behind him. So they don't really beat themselves. They just don't do the extra things anymore.
Yeah, it makes sense. It really does, personnel-wise. And maybe this will be the last one. I don't know. But I was going to ask you, like, not that Dyson Daniels is going to stop Jalen Brunson, because I'm a big fan of saying that stars don't get stopped. Yeah. You might be able to slow them down, maybe contain them. Dyson, as good as he is, probably isn't going to just completely annihilate Jalen Brunson. But when there have been nights this year, maybe in this new ecosystem of the Knicks, where Jalen's not clicking on all cylinders, how would they kind of play off of that? How have they adjusted when Jalen's maybe not, I know his volume's down, which makes sense. They have a lot more options this year, but like what's plan B if he's like not clicking on that night offensively?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because he did not, particularly in the first half. I thought Trae Young just grossly outplayed him in that first game between the two teams. And that was kind of a theme early in the season, especially with teams that were very switchy. Like, and that was maybe something I should have asked you about the Hawks defense, but I know when they have all those wings in there, they obviously have the personnel to do it, and they can put like one big wing on Cat, one big wing on Trae. And we've seen the best defenses do that against the Knicks. And until that Magic game, like that was a pretty clean formula for slowing this team down, because it's sort of like reverted the Knicks back to the offense they've been in the past, which was just, hey, roll out the ball, Jalen Brunson, like go make magic happen. And that worked because their offensive rebounding was so good, because their defense was so good. Like whatever like Jalen's like relative efficiency was, taking really tough shots, that was good enough. Early in the year, like teams were switching a lot. He was still doing that. He's leaned a little bit more into being a really high level passer, career high in assists, and has just taken advantage of all the spacing Karl-Anthony Towns has provided. I thought that would make him a really efficient driver. It has in spurts. He like hasn't shot insanely well at the rim. Like he's not at the numbers he was when he was on the Mavs earlier in his career. His floater's been a little bit off so far this year, but the last 12 games or so, like he's been just fantastic as a passer. He's shooting like well over 40% from three over like the last 15 games or so for the Knicks. So he's been really good. And that's almost a hard question to answer because he hasn't had a really bad game since early in the season. I think as the Knicks have sort of stabilized and there's been an uptick, he's just been super consistent. If he's off, they can obviously lean a little bit more into Towns. But I think the thing you're getting at is like if teams can kind of take away that two-man game, what can they do? And there hasn't really been a clear-cut answer. Like Josh Hart has picked it up at times. If you get the version of Mikal you've gotten the last 4 games, like I've kind of been calling for him all year, right? Like on the nights, other teams were able to take those 2 guys away. All right, guy we gave up 5 first-round picks for, like go and cook. And he seems like he's a little bit more ready for that now. So I wonder if the Knicks go that direction, if you stifle both of them. But it's still sort of an open question that I don't think the Knicks have a great answer to.
Makes sense to me. I'm on the other side thinking, Dyson's opened up so many doors for the Hawks defensively. Being able to not worry about who guards the lead ball handler for the other team is a refreshing thing. After watching the Hawks for the last several seasons, it's like, oh, Dyson's going to have that guy. And look, Jalen might beat him. He might score 30 points. He's really, really good. But it's like not a flashing concern in a way that it probably would be for a lot of teams because Dyson's just a unique talent on defense.
Definitely. It's I think it's a feeling of like controlling the controllables, right? Like if Jalen Brunson goes off against Dyson Daniels, you tip your hat versus like in past seasons, like, oh, he's obviously going to go off. We know right. Guard him. And that's trust me, getting OG Anunoby, I know the feeling and it is a great one. All right, we'll dive into some final key matchup points. Maybe make a prediction. I don't know. Probably not. We'll talk about it next on Locked On Knicks and Locked On Hawks.
Today's show is sponsored by Mint Mobile. With big wireless providers, what you see is never what you get. And somewhere between the store and your first month's bill, the price we actually thought you were going to get is magically going to skyrocket. With Mint Mobile, you never have to worry about gotchas ever again. And when Mint Mobile tells you that it's $50 a month, when you purchase a 3-month plan, they actually mean $50 a month for a purchase of a 3-month plan. None of the complicated bills, no silly fees or upcharges. It's all planned for you at Mint Mobile. Mint Mobile is here to rescue you with premium wireless plans starting at $15 a month. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Use your phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with all of your existing contacts. Ditch overpriced wireless, Mint Mobile's deal, and get 3 months of premium wireless service for $15 a month. Give this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for $15 a month. Go to mintmobile.com/lockedonnba. That is mintmobile.com/lockedonnba. Cut your wireless bill at $15 a month. That's $15 per month at mintmobile.com/lockedonnba. $45 upfront payment required, including $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details.
All right, Brad, we've kind of that's not a word. Dove into some of the stuff that makes this one fun. But I guess I was kind of alluding to it, but I want to hear your take on it. I can't quite remember what Atlanta did in the first game between the two teams, but how do you expect them to match up with the Knicks? Do you think like what we've seen a lot of teams do is just kind of slot their center on Josh Hart, dare him to shoot threes, have the center kind of linger near the rim and go like big wing on Jalen, which obviously they're going to do with Dyson Daniels, but then maybe have someone like Jalen Johnson guard Karl-Anthony Towns, again, with the caveat, Towns, I believe it's tendinopathy in his left knee, I want to say. He's questionable tonight against the Raptors. I kind of assume they might sit him tonight, play him in that NBA Cup quarterfinal game. But assuming those two are out there, what do you think beyond obviously Daniels on Jalen? Like what is kind of the approach to guarding that 2-man game, and how switchable outside of Trae Young do you expect the Hawks to be?
Yeah, this is really always the question with the Hawks is like, where do you hide Trae first and foremost? And I have defended his defense. It is better, but it's still a weak point. And that might scare them off of doing exactly what you just said, because if you do that, where do you put Trae? Trae ended up defending Mikal a lot in the first matchup, if I remember right, which makes sense. Like and that's one of the credit of the Knicks is there's nowhere really to hide him.
Yeah.
And also, they don't love putting Capella in particular on non-centers. They will do it if they need to, but it's usually more of a wrinkle. But this time around, like, this is the unique situation where you actually can game plan. You actually know who you're going to play for more than a week. Like, this watching the NBA, like 82 games, teams are not practicing. They're not really doing these huge like rollouts of game plans. But this might be an exception to that. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Clint on Josh Hart doing that and then throwing Jalen Johnson on Cat. That wouldn't surprise me. Jalen could rebound, which very much helps in that scenario, trying to keep Cat off the glass. But it's like, all right, you put Trey on OG, that's probably not going to work. You put Trey on Mikal, that's probably what I would do. Ricochet will guard the other wing, whoever it is, and I think I'm okay with that. Generally speaking, he's been pretty solid. But yeah, there's some. I'm not convinced in any direction. I think that you will probably see multiple looks to open the game. I think I'd still probably just bet on them having Capella on Cat and playing more straight up. But you'll probably see the wrinkle at some point.
Yeah, I'm curious about that because I think you nailed it. That's been one of the strengths of the Knicks so far. And where the one area Mikal was great early in the season is he was putting up Kevin Durant numbers in the mid-range. He was shooting something like 65% from mid-range through the first 12 games. And a lot of that was because teams were initially like maybe hiding a guard on Josh Hart, but then more because of what I just mentioned, lean towards putting their center on him. And they're like, all right, let's try a guard on OG Anunoby. And OG was consistently just pinning those guys under the rim, like sticking his butt out and putting them in the stanchion and dunking on them and like, all right, that's no good. Let's try Mikal. And he would just get to like these short fadeaways over and over again that were sort of his bread and butter when he didn't want to take layups. He didn't want to go to the free throw line. He didn't want to shoot anything other than a corner three. And I'm wondering if like a more aggressive version of Mikal Bridges could force the Hawks out of that early. Maybe they have to like go to something more traditional and put Trey on Josh Hart, and Josh Hart can then hurt the Hawks with his offensive rebounding. He shot the ball well from three. So that's an area I think the Knicks might potentially have an edge. I guess on the other end of the floor, they're like, is there anything specific you're curious about and how the Knicks match up, or how are you kind of looking at the Hawks to attack the Knicks defense?
Yeah, it's all about how Trey gets loose a little bit in this matchup. I don't want to bring it up to trigger you, but the playoff series a few years ago, Trey got loose a lot in that series. Yeah. And it's a different team, obviously, than that, which I would tell Hawks fans who don't watch the Knicks. It's like, hey, this is not those Knicks. They're very different now. They're more equipped.
Payton's not walking through that door.
Yeah, I was going to say
walking through a New Orleans door, but not our door.
They're more equipped to defend Trey too. But yeah, I think that can the Hawks make the Knicks pay at the rim? Atlanta has had a pretty intense during this winning streak. Uptick in their rim frequency, getting all the way downhill. They still have a lot of floaters too, but they've been certainly, I think, intentional, knowing that they don't have a ton of spacing and shooting to try to lean on it a little bit, but also to open up driving lanes. And that's not just Trey. That's Dyson Daniels getting downhill. That's Hunter getting downhill. Joe Johnson's probably the best at the team of getting downhill. Can they make the Knicks pay for having Cat as their primary rim protector? I mean, that's really the question there. Is like, I think that Towns is maybe a little bit better than people think that he is defensively in some circles, but I think that if you're the Knicks, you don't want to have the Hawks going to the rim all night long. That's what you don't want. I think you want the Hawks taking threes, honestly, as much as that might sound funny from what I'm going to say on the other end of the floor, where I would want the Hawks to chase the Knicks off the three-point line. I think you want the Hawks taking more jump shots, not getting all the way to the rim. If they can do that and put pressure on Towns as an anchor, I think they're probably would like that quite a bit, especially because it takes away some of the variance for 3-point range. And maybe I guess maybe on the other side, if you're the underdog, as the Hawks are in this game, maybe you want variance. Maybe I'm usually someone who will always bang that drum. Like, hey, if you're the team that's supposed to be worse, you're on the road, you might actually want to increase your variance, which might lead to more 3-point shooting. But for this team against this opponent, I think the Hawks actually might have the advantage at the rim, and they're going to want to maybe go try to exploit that.
Yeah, I have a feeling the Knicks will lean very heavily again into what they've been doing recently and have Cat play at the level they had, if you remember at the end of that game, that very like weird, late, lazy, like blitz of Trey Young, where like Josh Hart like kind of didn't know what to do. And Tim was like, get over there. And then Trey was like, all right, fine. And the Hawks, I just played 4-on-3. I can't remember if they got a 3 or a dunk, but it was kind of the nadir of like what was a really poor defensive effort for the Knicks. And I think they're going to be much more conscientious about trapping Trey this time and have Cat come out aggressively and then try to rotate behind him. Like we saw that for the first time against the Pelicans, and the Knicks held them like in that first quarter. It was like 1 point over a 10-minute stretch. New Orleans is like the Walking Dead right now, so take from that what it's worth. But they look just much cleaner than they did early in the year. Try to play that style where the rotations were just not on point enough for it to work, and other teams would get open three after open three. Like doing it now, it feels like they can do that, and just having like OG like rotate and be the back line of defense, like arguably that's an even better option than Karl-Anthony Towns, and you're maybe even more comfortable doing that now that they have Precious Achiuwa back, and he can be in some lineups with Towns, and he can be the guy rotating on that back end is like a pretty solid rim protector. They've also 2 games ago they showed a lineup where it was Deuce McBride, Mikal Bridges, Josh Hart, OG Anunoby, and Precious Achiuwa, and they were literally like, all right, we're switching like 1 through 5, like maybe not literally, but like 2 through 4, and Deuce is like arguably right with OG been their best defensive player this year. So it feels like the Knicks have more flexibility, and I think the Hawks are the kind of team to try to flex that against.
Yeah, it makes total sense to me. If that was Knicks, that's probably what I would like to at least look at. And Atlanta's had some ball security issues too this year. That they kind of come with the more egalitarian offense that they're playing. A lot more player movement involvement, which are good, but a little bit less of Trey as the Sun, Moon, and Stars has led to more turnovers because they've always been a great turnover avoidance team. Now they're in the bottom third of the league, and the Knicks are awesome take care of the ball. So if the Hawks lose the turnover battle by 10, they're in some trouble. That's not breaking news, but even more so in this matchup where the Knicks are great at ball security, Atlanta can't afford to turn the ball over and get in bad spots.
Yeah, I'm with you. Any final questions, or you want to wrap it up there?
We can wrap it. I'm looking forward to it. Like I said, the Knicks are going to be favored in the game. They should be. They're playing at home. But the Hawks have shown they've been kind of giant killers this year. They've got 4 or 5 wins against teams that they were not supposed to beat. So they're feeling okay. I wish they were feeling better than a 30-point loss on Sunday. I'm sure they did not love the vibes of that. But a couple days to get ready for this. The Knicks had to play on Monday. So, a massive rest advantage. I'm kidding to some degree. But, we'll see. It should be fun. I like it when these teams get together. Knicks fans hate Trae Young. It's got all those things. We intentionally did not do that conversation. It's probably for the best, but I know they do. I know they hate Trae Young. It's all in good fun. I think Trae embraces it as the heel, so that adds a little bit of extra flavor to a game that's already had some real stakes.
I think I've told you this before, but I'm a lifelong University of Oklahoma fan. So my feelings towards Trae Young are very weird and mixed. But you know what? That I can talk about that with my therapist, Brad Rowland. This was a whole lot of fun. Can you tell everyone where they can find you on social media, where they can find all your great work if they want to learn a little bit more about the Hawks before the game?
Yeah, I am at BT Rowland everywhere on social media, Twitter, Blue Sky, all those places. And then Locked On Hawks is the only thing you need to know on this podcast about me. I do other things too, but the Hawks coverage at Locked On Hawks. Gavin, for my listeners, where can they find Locked On Knicks? I'd imagine it's anywhere you can find podcasts. That's what I always say. But what do you think about that?
I was going to say real quick. I know in the past, I assume you still do some Braves coverage. Maybe with the Juan Soto news, some Yankees fans can become the Braves could be their NL team as they hate the Mets more than ever. But you can anywhere you can find podcasts at Locked On Knicks on Twitter. And we both have newsletters now, so check out the Locked On Knicks and the Locked On Hawks newsletters. But until next time, he's Brad. I'm Gavin. We'll talk to you very, very soon on Locked On Knicks and Locked On Hawks.